Great pleasure right now to welcome back to our show a good friend of mine, a good friend of the show. You've heard him on his nationally syndicated radio talk show, the Ron Seggi Show, called The Tonight Show of the Air on the USA Radio Network, aired locally on a bunch of stations. We'll find out the update of that, and good to have Ron Seggi join us again on the show. How are you, Ron?
Hi, Doug. How you doing? It's great to be back. I was just reminiscing about the time that we last spoke, and you reminded me that it was back in August, a year ago, so kind of an annual event. It's like Christmas.
That's right. Yeah, we do our Christmas early. That's right.
Christmas with Doug is what we call it.
Well, I guess the interviews now, we were just talking about that too, and broadcasting, it never really goes away now. In the old days, you do a show and it's gone, but now with the internet, you can podcast and it lingers. I think that's a great thing for our business, don't you?
I think it's marvelous, and you were just telling me how many hits that you have been getting on yours, and that's sensational. And you're right. I did a webcast one time with some people in Branson.
I saw that, yeah.
And people keep on telling me they saw it. We did it like 3 years ago.
Yeah. It's on YouTube. Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Right, yeah.
It's amazing, and I think that's where broadcasting is going, and it's been in flux, as you know, probably better than anybody. I mean, the business end of it is kind of up in the air, but I think it'll shake out. But right now we're kind of going through, well, how do you make money with the internet? How do you make money with all these different channels, right?
Well, it's funny because I remember when FM was nothing more than a throwaway, and the AM stations were thinking, well, they're nothing, an FM is a throwaway. And then, of course, when FM flourished and saturation became such a huge factor, AM got worried, and then they found a home with first oldies and then with talk and sports. And, of course, AM was in jeopardy when television came along. So now it looks like AM and FM have a little bit of a problem because there are so many sources to get programming, whether it's iPod or whether it's the Internet or all these other fancy names that you and I probably are out of touch with. At least I know I am. And it's very difficult to compete in the marketplace right now in terrestrial radio.
One thing I've seen lately, the last couple of weeks, a lot of FM stations now are taking over. In other words, AM programming is going to the FM side, and AM is unfortunately, I guess, kind of being left in the dust. You're seeing a lot more talk on the FM side now, which that would never been heard of before. FM was better for music. That was the thought,
it's a mindset, Doug. This just happened in Orlando. You have a great AM signal and at a powerful, and this has happened in a lot of markets, as you said. They have a powerful signal and good rating. If they don't have tremendous ratings, they at least have an audience that's tuning in and listening, so they're making pretty good ad revenue. And then all of a sudden, they, what we call in the business, simulcast. Well, in the old days, you would simulcast only because you didn't have enough programming to fill two stations, and you really made enough on the one that you didn't have to have two sources of revenue, one on the AM and one on the FM. But people have a misperception of FM talk. They think that FM talk is superior to AM talk, and it's a mono signal no matter what you do. I mean, you cannot separate your voice from the left side to the right side. So in essence, being on AM with talk is a natural commodity. And why some of these FM signals are being, and I don't want to say wasted because that's not the case, but the perception of the general public is if it's on FM, it's going to sound better. And it's just voice.
I agree with you. I mean, there's no difference in the sound. A voice is the same on FM or AM. Maybe you don't have a little static. That might be the only difference on FM. But other than that, it's the same.
Yeah. Sure, you got a better signal, and you got, in a lot of cases, a bigger, more uninterrupted signal, like you say, as far as static is concerned. But I was talking to a gentleman the other day that does a talk show on an FM station that he buys the time on, and he said, boy, now I told my friends, if you can't hear me in your right ear, you can hear me in your left ear. Well, that kind of reasoning is almost comedic.
Yeah, and of course, with satellite radio, although they've gone through some tough times recently, I guess they keep saying they're increasing their subscription base, but I know Sirius cut back a lot on their talent, so that's in flux. And now with internet radio, going to be putting cars. I saw that this week. I think that's where it's all going. It's all going to be internet wireless radio, and it'll all be, 10,000 available stations everywhere, I guess.
We never thought that when we got into this business, Doug, that maybe the announcer might be made obsolete. I remember one time, a long time ago, they had an automated announcer, right? And I was listening to it. It was, many, many years ago. And it sounded almost like a robot. And I said, boy, I am glad I've chosen this industry because I will never be replaced by a robot. Man, was I wrong.
Well, it's one thing, what you do, Ron, of course, so well with the interview show, what I enjoy doing. You can't have a robot do interviews because you got to think. Maybe we're in it for a while.
Unless you're interviewing another robot.
That's true.
You do a great job, but you always have. I've always
appreciate that. Yeah, well, I told you before in the audience again. I found your show, I guess, in the early 90s, I think is when you started down here. I found it kind of going around the dial when I came to Florida, and I've always enjoyed the interview type format, going back to, remember, Larry King's show, and of course, Tom Snyder. I mean, I think that format never gets old,
Well, it was funny, the first radio station I owned, and boy, here I'm talking about putting talk on FM, but it was an FM station. But all night, I had the opportunity to get Larry King. So I figured, well, we played rock and roll all day long on FM, but at the overnights, we played Larry King from Mutual. And I used to listen to it, and I used to think, well, that's kind of cool. You're sitting there and you're interviewing Bob Hope and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I got. Actually, he wasn't the very first person because that came along many, many years after I got into radio. But I go back to the days of Joe Pine and some of the real early interviewers. Merv Griffin used to do a radio show, and Mike Douglas used to do a radio show. And, of course, the old NBC Monitor days when Ed McMahon and Gene Rayburn and all those guys would do shows like we do now.
Yeah, we'll talk about Ed a little bit later on. Of course, you know him so well, working with him. But you talk about Larry King. I had a chance to talk to him a couple of months ago. He has another book yet, and it was fun to talk to him. I never met him before. We did a little bit of telephone, and I tell you, the last few years of his TV show, I think we talked about this last year, it looked like he was phoning it in. I wondered, is Larry okay? But I talked to him. He was as interesting and sharp as ever. So I guess the last couple of years, you were just kind of showing up.
So I think you're absolutely right. I remember that conversation we had, and I've had him on the show, and actually I've known him since the early 80s because I was an affiliate of his, and so we got to be friends. And he's a great storyteller.
Right.
I want to tell you. Yeah, I mean, he was one time at the Pennsylvania Association of Broadcasters convention, and boy, he could have been a stand-up comedian. But I think after a while, you just, I don't know what happens, but I'll let you know in about 15 years what happened.
Well, it was overproduced. I mean, he had so many guests. He spent half the show reintroducing the panel. I mean, you could tell he was reading the questions on cards. So, I mean, it wasn't the old Larry. It was an old Larry, but it wasn't the old Larry.
I like that. Well, I
just made that up.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I like that. But boom, you need some sound effects back there, a little rim shot.
Well, you mentioned he's doing stand-up comedy now. He's going to do a couple of dates, one in Sarasota coming up later this year. We'll hopefully talk to him again, and all around the country. So he's doing stand-up comedy now.
He is doing. I didn't know that.
Well, he calls it a one-man show, but he said, it's him telling stories and doing, stand-up comedy. That's what he enjoyed. He said if he didn't go into broadcasting, he would have been a stand-up comedian.
Well, he does tell good stories. He has a sense about him where he does tell the good stories. He told a story about an ice cream parlor that I remember. It's a long story. It was like the War and Peace. It was so long. but it was done very, very well. But Larry is the kind of guy that if he said to a contestant, not a contestant, if he said all these show hosts now are turning into contestant hosts of quiz shows. If he asked a guest, how did you get in this business? And the guest said, well, I shot my way through with a machine gun. He'd say, what were you playing next?
That's right. Which kind of went against his tenet. He wrote in an early book I read that the key to a good interviewing is listening. That gives you your next question. But he kind of forgot that, I guess.
Yes, and the person who was key at that, was Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
He was a good listener. But in order to be a good talk show host, Johnny used to always say, whether it's radio or television, you have to be inquisitive.
Right.
And, I have a couple of brothers that I guess I get on their nerves, because when I'm talking to a doctor or if I'm talking to a contractor or somebody on my cars or something, I ask a lot of questions. And they say, why do you ask so many questions? They're the professional. Well, that's what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, I find myself doing that too. I hope it isn't annoying to the average person, but you do that after a while if you do this kind of work, But
that's right.
But you learn. That's how you learn. So
that's exactly right, Doug.
Well, I want to ask you, Ron, this is kind of a media story, which I kind of got a little bit upset about. I mean, not upset, but a little annoyed. The whole Jerry Lewis thing. I know you with knowing Ed for so long doing the telethon. I think he got the MDA did a terrible job with the way they handled him not coming on the telethon this year. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
It's a little confusing. I know that in May he said this would be his last year. And then all of a sudden it was gone. He was gone completely. And it kind of shocked me. However, some radio guy brought to my attention. He said, when you let somebody go, you let them work out. You don't let them work out their 2-week notice, because you never know what they're going to say on the air. And of course, Jerry is brazen enough to say what he's thinking, and that might be one of the reasons why. The old disc jockey that you fire on Friday and you let him work 2 weeks, and the guy goes on next week and trashes the radio station. Maybe that's the same problem there. I don't know what was behind it. I do know that. I was at the telethon the year that they paid tribute to Ed.
Right.
And Jerry's a pretty demanding fella.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, I'm sure Jerry probably said something that, ticked off the MDA board. And I'm not getting against the MDA. They do great work, don't get me wrong. But I just thought the way the whole thing was handled, I think at least give him a chance to come on for 5 minutes and say goodbye. I mean...
well, I thought he was going to do that this year.
That's what the original plan was. And then all of a sudden he's gone from the telethon and they got rid of him as the chairman, which I thought that was odd.
Yeah, I did too. And if he would have resigned, I'm sure that they would have had a release out to that effect. Yeah. I really don't know what happened. I'm kind of very anxious to see. I know that the viewership and the number of stations carrying the telethon has diminished greatly in the past 15, 18 years. Because I think a lot of the TV stations don't want to give up the commercial time. It's not like the old days when they would just say, here, take the 18 hours and run with it. It's kind of pieced together. You get some here and some there. And I know that he was a little upset with that. But he had a pretty good situation going there for a long time with television stations who committed very, very valuable commercial inventory over to the telethon.
And over here in Sarasota and Tampa, the Sarasota station has dropped it, and the Tampa station just carried the Monday afternoon portion for about 5 or 6 hours. So it's been that way for a while. And now they're just doing a 6-hour show total. So it'll be interesting to see how many stations pick that up.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I wasn't even aware of that. I'll have to get a hold of a couple of my friends like Tony Orlando who worked it and see what the deal was. Although, you know what, now that I think about it, Tony told me this spring that Jerry called him and said, I won't need you anymore.
Is that right?
Yeah, I just happened to think of that when I said that. He said, just out of the blue, Jerry called him and said, in fact, Jerry didn't even call him. Somebody from his office said, wow. Jerry wanted me to call you, said, we don't need you anymore. So he must have seen it coming.
Yeah. I know Jerry said he's going to have a press conference the day after the telethon, and he said he had some things to say, so that should be interesting.
Well, then, that analogy that I was discussing earlier probably is right on the money.
That's right. Well, I just thought I'd bring that up. But I want to ask you, too, before we talk a little about Ed and some other things, you had the big story over by you in Orlando a few months ago with the whole Casey Anthony thing. I guess you probably heard enough about that, but that was probably a real pot boiler over there in your area of the woods in Florida, right?
You know, it hasn't stopped. Now she's on probation, and she is in town. I don't know if she's in town, but she's within the county. And because of the fact that she has such a great many death threats and personal harm threats to her, that she can't even go work now because she's right here in the backyard. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I will tell you one thing, is that it's amazing to me that, I'm not downplaying, this was a tragic event, but it's amazing to me how sometimes the news media will take one story and really expose it. I mean, this happens so many times in so many cities across the country, very similar things. I mean, Remember the woman who drove her children into the lake and she jumped out? This one here, for some reason, captivated the entire nation, and in some cases around the world. And even though it was a tragic event and everything else, it just surprised me that that was the one that everybody said is the century, the trial of the century so far. This happens every day.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised, too. It elevated almost to the O.J. Simpson trial status, which I didn't think it... I mean, obviously a very tragic story, but I don't think it was that level to me. But it made it almost that close.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that analogy is absolutely on the money. I agree with you 100%. It was equal to that.
Yeah. But Orlando was one of the stations. I know one of the women at the Orlando TV station was on O'Reilly every night, so it put this focus not only on her, but on Florida once again. But I know you're in the middle of that because you do your show from Universal Studios, so I'm sure you had a lot to deal with that as well. Although on a national level, I guess you didn't do as much of it, but it was important.
People would ask me about it, and to be very honest with you, I try to stay away from downtown anyway, only because of the traffic congestion. I don't need to go in that area. And what was amazing to me, and I don't know why it's amazing to me, because I've been in the news media long enough to know what people are like when they see an accident, but it was amazing how many fights and how many disruptions and how much activity surrounded the people who, quote, were fans of this trial. I mean, there were people that camped out for, days at a time. A woman left her family in San Francisco and drove cross-country. I mean, it was an obsession, and that is what the human nature is like sometimes, and that's more interesting to watch than the event.
Yeah, a lot of strange people come out of the woodwork on these things. Well, Ron, I guess some people that haven't been with us before, of course, the great McMahon did a show on your radio network, and you work with him very closely. You produced his radio show, of course. We all know Ed from The Tonight Show and Star Search and all that, and he passed away a couple of years ago. Any update? I know you were working on a book about him last year, and any update on that?
Well, to be honest with you, I actually have been still working on it. And I've come to a conclusion that how I'm going to finish it is this. And I always see little blurbs on Google where I mention it on your show, and it's taken off. But what I'm going to do is the remainder of the book I'm going to do in kind of a narrative form. In other words, I've been writing this. Because I like to write. And what's happening is that I'm losing, I think, a little bit of the aura of the story because I'm writing it in my words and trying to write it like he would say it. Right. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some taping and have some of those tapings transcribed so that I don't get so involved with the mechanical aspect of writing that I lose the value of the story. But no, I'm absolutely going to do it. I'm going to have a CD in it that's going to contain some of his famous comments and some bloopers of that that he and I did. So we're going to have fun with it. It was 2 years this past June. This wife just had her birthday on the 25th, and I miss him dearly. I got pictures of him all over my studio, he and I together. I really miss the guy. I really do. He was not only a friend. At first, he was I worked for him. Right. But then he was a friend. We were partners. We were pals. We talked 6-7 times a day. We wouldn't make a move without talking to one another. I actually think in the end, to be very honest with you, when I say in the end, even while Johnny was living, but, maybe the last 10, 12 years of his life, I really believe, and I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, I really mean this, I think that I was closer to him than anybody else.
Yeah, it's great tribute. I had a chance to talk to him a couple of times. I think we've talked about this before. Ed made you feel like he knew you for 30 years, even if he just met you the first time. So he's that type of guy.
He always said to me he wanted to be remembered as the most, I think he said the most friendly to his fans personality. He would go into an airport, and if somebody was at the ticket counter and he walked in, and they kind of looked at him like, I know that's Ed McMahon, but could that be Ed McMahon? But should I say something to Ed McMahon? And he could tell that and he'd say, hold on. He'd walk right up to him, and if there was a little boy, little girl, say, give me a high five, want to take a picture. He would actually go to the person because he never, ever, ever, he told me stories of celebrities that were just bad news when it came to treating their fans, and he said, I never want to be forgotten because I was mean to my fans. I want to be remembered as someone that always wanted to deal with the public that made him famous. He was a terrific guy.
Yeah, great tribute. I know there's a good comedy bit, speaking of YouTube again, you and Ed did kind of a version of Who's on First, kind of an updated version. That's still circling around on YouTube. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, boy. You know, the other day I had to go someplace, and I had a briefcase that he gave me. And I keep all these shows of his, and I keep all the notes of the programs we did and everything else because I just want to have those things for this book. And I'm turning around, and I'm looking at this briefcase, and I see these papers, and I pull it out, and I realize that it's his side, his version of this routine that we did. Yeah, because the highlights was his part, you know, where he had the highlight pen.
Right.
I got to keep this because I got my part. This was the part that he was reading, you know. We had a ball with that. That's the old Who's on First. This was with computers.
Now, did you both write that, or was that a piece somebody sent in to you? That was great.
I think that I heard a version of it. I saw a version of it, but it was real short, and then we turned around and embellished it.
Oh, yeah, that was great. You use all the different terms and computers, and it's funny. Check it out. It's on YouTube. You just type in Ed or Ron Seggi's name, it'll come up.
You know what's funny about that is that normally a comedic bit works better when you're working with somebody and you see him and you can see the timing. He was in Los Angeles and Hollywood, in Burbank, not in Burbank, but in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I was in Orlando, and we did that over a special
radio line,
ISDN line, what we call it. And we didn't even see each other. We actually did that 3,000 miles apart.
That's pretty good. That's not easy, because you usually want to look at the other person when you're doing that kind of comedy or routine, you know. So it's not.
Yeah, that's what you want to do.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Ron, as we usually do when we have you on, we open the floor to you and say, what's on your mind? Anything you want to get off your chest?
Well, you do. You know,
within reason.
When I was driving in today, I was thinking, I said, I know that Doug always does this, and I always get on the bandwagon like I look like I'm running for president. But I think I will say something, okay? And I usually say something that's out of the mainstream what I talk about, which is entertainment, show business, cars, or whatever, some of my own interests. But I do, as you know, have an interest in politics from the standpoint of presidential politics. And there's a great, in fact, we just interviewed the fellow yesterday who did produced a show called 9/11, which is President Bush describing in detail that day. It's going to be airing this weekend on the National Geographic Channel. But I will say this. We have to, in this country, get back our act together, okay? We have to. I mean, this little ordeal that we went through last month with the budget and this situation that we have with this national debt, you know, and the fact that these jokes are flying that we're never going to pay back China and Japan what we owe them, and the whole aspect of having us indebted to somebody else is very unsettling. And I think that is starting to grasp the American public, and I think even worse, it's starting to grasp worldwide, where what happened to the United States, where they used to be able to do whatever they wanted to do and not have to look in their, you know, in their balance of their credit card. And I think that is terrible. I really do. I don't know how you fix that. If I did, I guess I'd be the president. But it has to be resolved, and I think that the politics on both sides of the table, and in the House and in the Oval Office, has missed the boat drastically. I'm not saying for any reason that it's not fixable, but these people got to get to a mid-ground, because this national debt is crazy, and the fact that we owe China so much money is ludicrous.
Yeah, I agree. I think people are waking up. People tend to get a little complacent, but we saw the last year's election how the House turned over, so I think you're going to see more of that. Maybe not this election coming up, but definitely in 2012 it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, you know, we all, of course, are very patriotic when it comes to our soldiers, which we should be. The men and women fighting to protect this country, whether abroad or here on our homeland, these are the heroes of the entire government that we have, are those people. However, some of these schmoes that are running the government, boy, oh boy, it's amazing, you know. It is just staggering to me. I tell you what, I have a really difference of opinion. I think experience is great. Okay, if you have experience, in other words, I certainly would like to get a announcing job over a person that doesn't have the experience that I've had.
Right.
However, if that person is going to bring something better to the table because they're new and fresh, then maybe I should step aside in a situation like that. That's what we're looking at in the United States Senate and Congress.
Well, to do a heavy on, just talk politics one day. I do a little political show, so we'll do that sometime.
I like to. I don't get a chance. Doug, you give me a vent. I don't have a chance to talk about it. I have to talk about this new movie that Tuesday night that went at 8:00. You know, and boy, this album is true. And not that I don't like doing it. I love show business. There's no business, you know. But I really like to. You give me a chance to vent.
Well, I think it's important. I think people want to hear opinions sometimes of the show hosts that they listen to. So I enjoy that aspect of it anyway. But we can hear. Go ahead.
It's like going behind the scenes, you know.
Yeah.
You know, remember the old television shows where they flip the camera around, or the host would go out in the audience, and you get the chance to see the cameras,
sure,
the phones, and spots, and that was behind the scenes.
I always like that.
When you hear somebody all day long interview about something, you don't actually get a chance to hear what they're all about, and you allow me to do that, so I appreciate it.
You can hear Ron Seggi on his show. It's syndicated all around the country. It's on the USA, I believe it's IRN radio network. Combine the name now, right? IRN is part of USA Network, and
the cable radio network too.
Cable radio network, which is on a lot of the cable systems. You can listen to it there as well. Ron, always great to have a chance to talk to you, and we look forward to seeing you sometime this fall over here. And I'm going to get over there. I know I say it every time, but I'll get over to Orlando one of these days too.
Oh, I will enjoy that very much. I always tell my guests, you know, on the show, I said, if you ever get to Orlando, let us know, be our VIP guest. I've never said that to you, so Doug, come over to Orlando, be my VIP guest. We'll break bread together. We'll have some good times.
Be great. Ron Seggi, our guest.